Hey, Jay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good
Good morning.
morning. Why are you
was
trying
good.
to sing my song? All right, fine. You can sing it.
Mainly because you over sing me, like your voice is more. And so it makes me be able to sing and no one can hear my voice because
Well,
it's really bad.
I have a slight problem right here.
Hold.
Hold on just a second. We never do this in the podcast, but Ace got neutered and Ace just came in my office. And
Hold on. We're on pause. We will pause this.
So
Hold
we
on.
are pausing this for just a second.
That was a pause. Hold on. We have rare emergencies. We're like, that's got to go. Good job, Natalie. Okay. You want to start over again?
No reason not to just keep on going. All right. So slight interruption. Dog got in the way and now we're back.
Okay.
So Jay, good morning. How are you doing?
I'm delightful. And I'm so glad that you and I got our, we're sort of
we got the memo.
But we're moving into fall. We're solids. I'm limeish.
Yes, we are blue. Solids.
Yes.
We're solid and we're solid.
Yeah. That's and Jenifer brought our colors together, our guest today. She did got a little blue. She's got some
got
cream.
the memo.
Yeah. Yeah.
She got the memo. I love that.
Hey, you want to tell us, you want me to tell you about Jenifer? Because we got a great
I would love
today.
for you to, because now it's not about my dog or him getting neutered in his cone. If you want to see how cute he was, he's on the YouTube channel. We're going to make sure, why not leave him in there? Because you know what? It's cheaper not to edit. All right. So Jay, tell us about Jenifer.
Okay, so today I am truly honored to introduce you to Jenifer Massie. She says serving others has always...
Jenifer Massie.
Okay, we're going to start that again because I have mistyped. Okay, today, Natalie, we are struggling today.
Yeah,
okay.
Mostly you.
Mostly me. All right. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to Jenifer Massie. She says serving others has always been part of who she is, and that caregiving came naturally from volunteering in high school to Gramps and Grannies, which I love, where she was paired with seniors in need of companionship, to college, where she worked at a runaway shelter. She's played multiple roles in caregiving. I'm not telling the whole story, Natalie, so don't say, JJ, don't
Please
tell it all.
don't.
Okay.
Jenifer's got to be able to talk about something.
I know. So she helped care for her grandmother, supporting a great aunt and her husband's uncle while raising 3 children. And now, as her parents age, she has become part of their care team. When her oldest brother, though, was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, she helped care for him until just weeks before his passing. She was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. So this is a season of life she calls the painful gift. And it was a time of what she says, deep surrender, growth, and closeness with God. Through pain, she found profound gratitude. And I love that. That is a quote like I could write on my wall, Jenifer. So thank you so much for being here with us today. We are ready for you to get talking.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and this is fantastic. So I had the opportunity to be on a panel with Jenifer. That's how we met. Jenifer lives here in sunny Virginia with me, because all the cool kids live in Virginia. And we were on a panel talking about caregiving. And Jenifer, you work in the field in supporting individuals, but you have direct experience yourself being a unpaid family caregiver. And so why don't we kind of start from the beginning and give us a little background about your family and growing up, and how kind of lead us into care, because it sounds like you were a youth caregiver. It started really early. The attitude of service started early.
Yeah. So fortunately, I was able to attend a school that put a big emphasis on service. And so part of what was offered was different opportunities to give back to our community. And one of those, I think it actually, when I started thinking back on it, was middle school, when they offered this Gramps and Grannies, which was a really cool idea, where our administrators reached out and met people in the community that were in walking distance to our school. And so once a week, we would be partnered with a senior who was probably aging solo. And we'd go down and just spend some time with them. I'm not sure you could get away with that in this day and age. However, then it was, and I do think it planted a seed. There was definitely a mutual. It was, good for me and good for them.
Yeah.
As I age through that school, there was another opportunity to care for medical community up the street too. Also longer walk, but walking distance, to care for physicians and nurses' children.
Oh,
While they were like to help out in the daycare that was
yeah.
adjacent to the hospital. And so I would do that as well. And that sparked something in me too, being around that kind of energy, and just filled my heart. But for a personal story of my family, my grandmother, my family, I'm the only one born and raised in Virginia, in Lynchburg. All my family was from up north. My father was an only child. And his mother aged all the way up until her 80s up in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
So the time came where my parents were now my age, later 50s, and my grandmother needed to be moved. She had had several falls, and the time came where there was just no other support for her. Her friend group, had passed away, and her community was getting smaller, and her support system was getting smaller up in Massachusetts. So the time came to move her. Well, at that point, I was living in Raleigh. My parents had a place in Raleigh, and they found an assisted living for her. My parents' lives were very busy at that time, and I was taking classes at NC State. And so I would fill those gaps, and be part of my grandmother's care team. And I remember taking a break, one of my breaks from school, to fly up. My grandmother was hospitalized. And so my oldest brother made the arrangements. He was in med school at the time, and made the arrangements for me. And I look back on this, and it is kind of shocking how we just all do what we have to do. Right. And so I went up and cared for my grandmother while she was in the hospital. And then the decision was made to move her to Raleigh. And so I helped care for her. My parents had a place in Virginia and in North Carolina. And I would be, when they were traveling between the two places, I was the backup.
Oh, you were backup.
I was backup, but
yeah,
but so I was forefront.
Well, and I was getting ready to say, so you said you were in college, you were in your early 20s then, I'm assuming. And
yes.
Then, or late teens, early 20s when this happened. And you are truly, it sounds like you started, we talk about youth caregivers, and I think there's right at the American Association of Caregiving Youth talks about there being about 5.7 million caregiving youth in the United States. And most of these youth, like yourself, I mean, you did volunteer work, but then it sounds like you had a family that had a culture of care. It was just something that was done from generation to generation. Would you say that's true?
Yes, very much so. My mother was one of six children. A sister had passed away early, and there was a huge age difference between her and her two younger brothers. And so she was raised, helping care for her siblings. And I think that, it just does get passed down naturally.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, go ahead. So you mentioned an older brother. So Natalie always asks us, where are you in the birth order? How many siblings, and where are you?
So I have 3 older brothers.
Okay.
So I am the baby girl of 4.
Oh, very protected.
That's very interesting to me.
So protected later in life, but I would say earlier it made me scrappy.
Oh, that's good. She was changing tires. She was picking up toads.
Riding dirt bikes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever it took to be part of the group.
Oh, she's resilient.
I know she is. She's bouncing back. So let me ask you this. You've got those care experiences, but during this time, so I know that you're married, you have 3 children along this path. Tell me how that interjects with, where does that bounce into all this life here?
So I met my husband in high school. So he's my high school sweetheart.
I love that.
Yeah.
We love a love story. We're not going to lie to you. Our mom and dad were high school sweethearts.
Yeah. So we met at 16 and 17 and, took that little hiatus that you have to take when you go off to college. I'm a year ahead of him in school. And so we did take a little hiatus there, but found our way back. Another one of those threads that God had put us in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
But always stayed connected. So then we ended up dating for 8 years prior to getting married.
Oh, wow.
Got married, and we're on year 32.
Oh,
Wow.
so
Yeah.
you've cared for. I want to kind of bring us up here. I'm glad that you say, because you can tell you work in the industry, because most people would not say this when you said I was a part of the care team. And I think that's important, because this is the
Yeah.
first step to really identifying as part of being a caregiver and understanding your role in that team. We always talk about the importance of having a team. And I think, my question for you would be, how did your parents, and I want to go back to that a little bit. How did your parents have that? Did your family have this conversation about, we're moving your grandmother down to the home, down to live close by? This is how we're going to do it. Do you and your brothers have this? Is it a family meeting, or is it, this is what's going to happen and everybody's going to jump in where needed, and if asked, volunteer kind of thing?
Well, I will say it's, in that situation, I'm giving you a 20-year-old, 21-year-old's perspective. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there were conversations that I was not a part of, especially on my mother's part, because it really, the burden was on her. And she was my mom worked full time as well as my dad. And my brother, by that point, my brother was he was a general surgeon, and he was practicing at that point. So I'm sure there were discussions as the baby, right? You don't ever lose that. So I'm sure there were discussions. I just was not part of them.
Yeah. So you were just tagged in when needed. Like, you just knew you were going to come help because that just seemed like the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I think, my mother and I were very close, and I saw the burden on her. So I think I stepped in to support, which I being in that, like you said, now that I'm in the industry, and I do see how easily caregivers you can lose yourself very quickly and not even know it, because you're going through the motions as they're unfolding, and for me, that went on for many a year, a long, long time, where I was, and I was doing it out of a place of gratitude. I mean, it grew me, and I have no resentment or, in hindsight on it, but I would caution people, one of the things you asked is know thyself, like really spend some time. If you're new to caregiving, it's a great opportunity. If you've been caregiving for years and years, spend that time really to center and figure out your needs. Because oftentimes we get into this pattern, and we don't realize. And for me, it took a life event to shake it up. And do the refocus.
So I'm gonna pause here, because I want to transition into the next episode, because you, again, like so many caregivers, it's so funny when we have conversations with caregivers, they don't typically just have one episode of caregiving, or they have one experience and then that's it. You're one and done. Yeah. It typically ends up being something that they have multiple episodes, and you've definitely had that. And so we're going to jump into the next window of time where you provide care when we get right back.
CareForward is a technology platform that connects volunteers with seniors, the disabled, and those with chronic or complex health conditions, offering support like transportation, home visits, and more. Details online at careforward.io.
All right, everybody, we are back here with Jenifer Massie, and we're talking about next phase, because she's been care team and she's been younger. She's been caring while she was in college. So as part of the family team. So let's talk about next phase, Jenifer, because I know at one point you are sandwich caregiver. So what was the next step in this care journey?
So I think the next would have been a great aunt. Once again, my father was an only child, and this was his his maternal uncle's wife, had no children. So he was pretty much like their child. And she and her sister were both widowed, back up in Massachusetts again, and needed to be cared for. And it was causing a lot of journeying back and forth for my mother and my father on occasion, but mostly on my mother, to care for these two ladies. And so they were able to get them assisted up there, but one of them passed. My Aunt Irene was brought back to live with my parents in Lynchburg. And at that time, my husband and I had had my third baby. And we were living down the street from my parents. They had a family farm, and we had built a home down the street from them. And so I was part of my Aunt Irene's care team, and she was delightful. I mean, she was one of these very easygoing, always had a smile on her face no matter what. Life was, one of the things when I remember her is I always try to smile, and my face doesn't tend to rest in a smile, but she was one of these people who it always rested with a smile. And so I was part of her care team because my parents were still traveling for work and also for pleasure. And so, I was now instilling in my children, because my oldest at this point would have been around 9. My son was 6 or 7. And then, my youngest, up until when she passed. And she passed Mother's Day weekend, 2007, 6, something like that. So she was the next person I had the pleasure of caring for, and being part of that to assist my mother.
Were you working at the time?
No. Well, yes, I was raising our 3 children, but my brother and my sister-in-law, my oldest brother, who I keep referring to a lot, she was a professional, and my brother, being a professional as well, both wanted and needed to be working. And so when my sister-in-law got pregnant a year after, she was pregnant during my husband's and my wedding. We moved back because there was a death in my husband's family. My father-in-law passed. So we moved back because he wanted to be close to his brothers. I was asked to care and help raise take care of him during the day, my nephew. And so I got he was my first baby, in the sense that I got to spend every day with him. So I'd gone from the runaway shelter where I had worked in North Carolina, and I did a short stint in social services down in North Carolina. But we moved back to Lynchburg to be closer to family after my father-in-law passed.
You were a full-time daycare. Some were yours, some weren't, but that's okay. You were a full-time daycare.
At some point, it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
If you talk to, especially, it's almost like, and Jenifer, you've worked in foster care, and this is such a cultural thing. It's just like, I'll just bring them. What's one more? And so it doesn't really matter, related, not related, but it's interesting. This culture of care is really built into your DNA, and it started from a young age. It very much sounds like, and what was modeled to you. And I love that you said, I started modeling that to my own children. So I want to go back to your great aunt. What are some of the tasks that you were responsible for? Because if you're raising your children, because we were literally just talking to a group, we were being interviewed about what it's like to be a sandwich caregiver. And so let me ask you that question. What's it like to be a sandwich caregiver? Because you were a sandwich caregiver, but you had 2 different situations. You had your great aunt and then your husband's uncle. Did those feel different based on the ages of your children? Did it feel different based on where you and your husband were in life and professionally? Tell me a little bit about those 2 different, how that differentiated, and did you build on it, those experiences?
Definitely. So, and I say modeling, but also modeling can come off as positive. And I don't think necessarily all that I was emulating was positive, in the sense of, not putting my needs before others. And at times that's very important. I'd say it's important all the time.
Yeah.
To make sure that you're listening to yourself. But so the difference between the 2 would be that my mother very much engaged with my great aunt, and there were resources to be able to have additional help. So it was filling in when the additional help couldn't come in. There was no, I don't recall ever having to do the personal care side, like the hands-on care for her. And like I said, she was just so delightful. I mean, it really was more of companionship and being present and making sure that we were eyes and ears and available should there be a call off. they were able to get her into a really beautiful local CCRC here for her final days.
I want to pause for a second. It's interesting that you said she had resource, but which is such a big deal. And you know this, it's such a big deal to be able to have that financial resource. And so listeners who are out there, the ability to plan for that is critical so that you are really able to build your care team and really not burn out any one or two individual people. Yeah. And I think those are things that I wish that we had conversations about growing up. But the other piece of it is you don't downplay the fact that you were a caregiver for her by saying, well, I was just doing companionship. I was just the word just can come out of a lot of people's mouths. And that's why I think a lot of people don't self-identify as caregivers, because they're like, don't undervalue the impact that you're having on being present with, being a companion.
Yeah. I think I was holding space for my mother and my father. And it's important. It's important, the more you can have your bench go out and have that for the ripples, for people to be able to step away and do what's needed.
I love that. So tell me about the difference then with your husband's uncle.
Well, he was, that one, fell naturally. We had moved. My parents were spending more time away. And my husband and I decided to move into the city because our children, we moved from a farm to a city.
You moved to the big city.
We went to the big city of Lynchburg. And he ended up being right down the street from us. And he truly was a dear friend of mine. I would visit him weekly. He was very pragmatic, great sense of humor. He could tell me things that anybody else could tell me and I could hear it the first time. But so I began to see a decline, and I knew he wanted to age and he wanted to remain in his home. That was very, very important to him in the conversations we had. And then I noticed that there were personal care needs that neither he nor I wanted to cross that boundary. We set a boundary, whether it was, we never had the discussion, but we both knew. And so I had reached out to his, two of his three children who I was fairly close with that did not live in the area, and just gave them a touch point. They were aware of his health and they would come in and visit and spend time with him. But so we reached out to a local agency that was locally owned and operated at the time. And I was part of that, and the irony in all of this, or, just that, I won't even say irony, it's just a beautiful thread that has formed through this, was that his oldest son and his wife had just purchased their very first home care agency upon his retirement from a long career at IBM. They wanted to go into business together. They had some service failures while trying to get care for her mother. That led for them to look into. And then they found their very first Bright Star Care in Northern Virginia.
Wow.
And bought that. And all of this is happening at the time that I'm caring for his father. And this is 12 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how David's cousin Rob and Carrie and I, spent more time talking about making sure his father was getting that care and seeing them upon their visits while they were caring for him and learning the business up in Northern Virginia. But it was a different agency because Bright Star Care wasn't in this territory, but they bought it when the locally owned and operated sold. So they bought the territories in Lynchburg and Roanoke at that time.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So I think, you touch on a couple of things and I'm like, ooh, go back to that. I like that you said, you all had this unspoken, you and the uncle had this unspoken agreement that this is the line. And I can tell you, caring for our mom and doing the things that we need to do, especially related to ADLs, which is activities of daily living, otherwise known as personal care. And they cross over into each other because there's general activities of daily living. And then there's the true personal care where you're getting all in people's business, is the way I would put it. Yep. And I think that it would have felt, for us, it would have been very different had we if we were caring for our dad right now. I think when you have opposite sex that are doing that, and then children or whoever, that cannot be a problem for paid, because I feel like there is this natural boundary respect. There's its profession, and then versus the role that you're originating in, and then feeling like, oh, that feels like too personal. And being able to have those conversations, and or not, but having the look of like, we know we're not going there. Like, we're not going there, friend.
And Bob was very good at giving a look.
Yeah.
So we knew. I knew.
So, it's the thing is that's interesting to me that I hear you say, number one, I love that your parents travel a lot. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that's pretty magic. At the time though, and you're doing all the caring and and I say that not in an ugly way, because your husband's working, you're taking the lead in caregiving and what I think is a traditional female role, identified as a female role. Did you and your husband have a conversation about like, hey, I keep caring for all your people? Or you know what I mean? Like, how did you all decide who was going to be the primary? Because do you have a career? Are you working at this point as well? Are you still?
Well, I was
full-time mama?
So I took care of Isaac, which, my brother and sister-in-law paid me for, gave me well for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
We will take him in.
Yeah. They were, they wanted it to have a professional component, and the expectations set in there.
Okay.
And
Fair.
so I was being financially compensated for caring for my nephew. My brother had decided to retire early, and another one of those God moments. He was a very spiritual person, and it just spoke to him that he needed to retire early, which, without telling too much, was a very beautiful gift that he gave to his son, because my nephew was 12, I think, at the time. So from the time my nephew was 12, I was no longer earning an income. However, my father and my mother, my father had his own business and was a business consultant. And so I would do work for them. So I was supplementing income, but I was not a professional. And, my goal was always, and my husband's, and we did have this conversation, that I was able to be there and be a stay-at-home mom and do all that responsibility that goes with that and be that focused. So I would coach volleyball, and I would get paid, and I would do summer. I mean, so there were.
So it sounds like you were a professional still.
So
she's a domestic engineer.
You are a domestic engineer.
That
my
is a
friend.
Professional.
Yeah.
So,
and you're,
yeah. So the Bob wasn't, there was never a discussion about it, because I just saw a need, and I stepped in. And I think that's, I'm sure there's many other caregivers out there that these roles, you fall into them. And my biggest, I guess, cautionary is to always take a pulse on that. I wish I had done better of that, because it took a big wake up call for me to take time to do that. And the reason I say that is because now that I am in the industry and having these conversations more often with a variety of people, often see where people, it gets to the point where the person being cared for has panic attacks, anxiety attacks, when this person is no longer, so you get to a point, or can get to a point, where it becomes even more difficult to take that next step and get that respite. It's still doable, but it's harder. It's that separation anxiety, very similar to the 2-year-old, or that 18-month, that time little period. And I've seen that time and time again. And I've seen it, my parents are not traveling as much now. My father has been diagnosed with several different illnesses, that one of which is Parkinson's. We have that in common. And my mother is his primary, and they care for each other. But my mother, there's a lot of doctor visits. There's a lot of this and a lot of that. And, I think the difference now, when you talk about Jenifer and my roles before cancer, and then who I am and now, we have care. caregivers going in and assisting and giving my mother that respite. And it's not me. And I have a brother who's now retired, who's now stepped in and doing more of those kinds of touch points to make sure the house, things that need to get done. That used to be all me down the road. So that it's changed.
Oh, I think this conversation is so rich with great advice and nuggets and to be able to be insightful. I mean, because I think that's what I keep hearing you saying is you're able to be insightful in the saying, hey, look, this worked for me in the past, but if I were to do it again, as I'm carrying forward, I know these are the things that I need to do to respect myself, to be able to give as much as I can give. And both things can be true. We're going to take another break for a second and we're going to jump back into this because it gets more. And gosh, Jenifer, I'm so glad you're my best friend and not JJ's. Okay. That's okay, Jay. She'll be your friend too. All right. We'll be right back. I don't know about you, but my inbox is always cluttered with useless emails. But there's one I always open. The Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver newsletter. You may say, Natalie, what makes yours so special? Well, I'm biased, but don't just take my word for it. Here's what our subscribers say they love. First, it comes once per month, and you can read it in under 5 minutes. Next, you'll find amazing tips and resources to use in your everyday life. And who doesn't love a recommendation? These sisters do, which is why we share sister-approved products and discount links to save you time and money. And of course, you're first to know about the upcoming month's confessions. Just like our show, you're guaranteed to relate, be inspired, leave with helpful tips and resources, and of course, laugh. Go to our website, confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com, to sign up for our newsletter today.
All right, everybody, we are back here with Jenifer Massie. And wow, she's like a layer cake. I always say it's like an apple stack cake because you kind of smush it together. Like it's not just a layer. So you've got all these, you're learning as you go through this, but I know that you come to a point where, and you talk about this sort of pivot point. I want to talk about if if you're open to talking about, or we're at that stage where your brother kind of steps in, because I think this is your next phase. So let's talk about this, how this occurred, because this is your oldest brother, is the brother that I think kind of makes a pivot point for you, where a lot happens.
Yes. So 2016, my brother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. It was Christmas Day. He had driven back from church with his wife and his son. And he made this declaration that if he were to die today, that he could not, have asked for any more, that he just truly felt blessed. And he had from a persistent cough that my sister-in-law had decided, he's a general surgeon, my brother. And she was like, it's time. You need to. And so he went, and was able, I think maybe the 26th or the 27th, went and got scanned, got an x-ray. And as soon as he saw it, he knew, he's seen it before and he knew. They gave him 6 months. By the grace of God, Keytruda had just been released, and that extended his life for 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Beautiful gift for all of us. So, as all this was unfolding, my sister-in-law, really her passion, and she's very gifted. She's a professor at Washington and Lee University, and she's the medical school director in organic chemistry. If that tells you anything, is her passion. She's brilliant.
She's smarty smart.
She's smarty smart.
Smarty smart.
So she, that's her that's where she gets rejuvenated, right? That's her. Right. And my sister-in-law is very good about her boundaries. And that's one thing, we all have our strengths, and my sister-in-law has always been good about setting her boundaries, like she did when she knew that, taking care of an infant was not filling her tank. So this was something that she needed assistance with. And of course, my mother, you can imagine as a mom, having, being told that that your son, and because he was 57 at the time, he was my age when he was diagnosed. So between us and then a dear friend of my brother's, and that is who my sister-in-law really wanted to charge it up, was to have somebody that she hired, just like she had done me, to be the primary and build that relationship. And this woman was a good friend of my brother's and my sister-in-law's. And so she stepped in, and between the three of us, we provided the transportation and the care. My brother was still able to do those personal ADLs that you mentioned. But it was being there for him. Right. And this was very different because this was my big brother. This was my, he was my rock from the time I can remember. And so to have, I would have done anything, for him and my children, this is where I talked about modeling, and my oldest daughter ended up becoming part of both Bob's care team, Uncle Bob, and also my brother's. She had taken a gap year and was part of, so she was emulating just like I had emulated my mother and all this as we go. But caring for my brother was enlightening, exhausting at times, emotionally, to see, there were some very vulnerable moments with him as this diagnosis, because my brother never smoked a day in his life. This stage 4 lung cancer came out of nowhere. We were not exposed to secondhand smoke growing up. This was, him trying to figure out in his mindset, like, how did I get this? They were, and then the exiting, those hard conversations he and I would have about, leaving his wife behind and leaving his son. And would he see his son graduate from college? Would he see him, graduate from medical school? Would he see him get married? Would he see his grandbaby? And he got to do all those except the grandbaby. And I do know he saw the grandbaby because he's always with us. But so it was a beautiful time up until about a month prior. Well, I'd say 3 months prior to his passing, I was getting more and more tired. I would still go and visit with him, but I was not feeling well. And there was something seriously wrong. And having been a general surgeon, we talk about things like poop. we would talk about anything. And I just told him I was describing, what my experience was in the bathroom, and that I just was not, something wasn't right. And he said, it sounds to me like you have an obstruction and you need to get seen. And this is him, and we knew he was in hospice at this point. But he was still giving me that advice. And I went to the doctor and the GI, and then went in for the scope, and they couldn't even do it because I had a tumor the size of my fist in my rectum.
Wow.
And so 2 weeks prior to my brother's passing, I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer.
And I know I can't even imagine, because you now have this complete reversal. You have been the permanent, like to me, it feels like you're the stationary figure that is like a care figure. Like you're always there. Like if there's somebody, there's a need, whether you're the primary but you are a caregiver you're a part of a team. You're consistently a part of the team. They're like, you're the sixth man. We want you on our team every time, right? Because sixth man's important. And, I think now you're put into this position where you're needing to be cared for, and your brother is end of life, truly. And I know that when you said to me when we were not on the panel, but we were talking beforehand, how that experience allowed you to be able to let him go.
Oh, yeah. So having a tumor the size of your fist and not being able to, go to the bathroom, you don't eat much. I wasn't eating anything at that point, and actually was living off a Boost. So I was very, very sick. But I was very much leaning into my faith. I've always been a believer, and I was leaning and leaning and leaning my faith. And I do not. There's a thin veil that they talk about, in the Bible, that veil, and I do believe that I was the closest to God in this time, because I was at my weakest and I was making choices, and I was very much at peace, feeling God's presence, feeling the power of prayer. People were praying, and I could feel it. And I was very vulnerable, very weak. Now, it was, to be very transparent, it was very rocky. I mean, my household, as you have pointed out, I was the caretaker. I was the one that people went to. And now all of a sudden, I'm not. I'm the one that's having to ask for it, a very different. So the roles it was like a giant pot of spaghetti with every kind of noodle you can imagine just got thrown across the room, and what stuck where, whatever. So at that point, I was the closest to God and felt his presence so much. And I do think it was a protection for me, in that when my brother passed, I was at peace for him, because I knew that it was selfish of me to want him here when he was going to get loved on more immensely with being up with Jesus. That love could never compare to what I could give him here. And it really, there were so many beautiful moments in all of that. I miss him dearly. I hear him, I see him, and there's a giant hawk that likes to come and sit in my backyard. And I know, I always think that it's him coming, because he's looking right in my bedroom window in the morning. And I'm like, yeah, I know who sent you. I know. But in that time, I was learning to be humble. I was learning to be vulnerable. And that's why I say this, truly, that diagnosis and me being on the receiving end of care really transformed my life. It broke some family patterns. Even functional families are dysfunctional.
Of course, we're all dysfunctional.
Right. And, there was definite room for growth. One of the things that I think that I've learned for myself is I was doing a lot of the emotional work for a lot of people for most of my life. And when you do that, you're stunting other people's ability to grow and so by me now stepping back, people were growing in ways that were needed. And so in that being said, I am not a hands-on caregiver like I was with my parents. And that was a big transformation for all of us when I took on this role. I spent a lot of time just praying about, what was this next step when I got my no evidence of disease, after going through treatments, and, what was this next piece going to look like? And when this opportunity, full circle again, that beautiful thread that God has woven, and I've been able to see where, Rob and Carrie, Bob's, they come to me and they've got the rights to Lynchburg and to Roanoke, and ask, would I be interested in doing a little market research? And now I'm, regional sales director.
Yeah.
So a little market research, because I believe in it so much. And I believe that, it's so important for people to have resources available to them. And I know what it's like to have people in your home. I'm still consider I still pray for her every day. My nurse, I went to her baby shower. One of her close friends, works PRN for our agency. I mean, it's just, the people that touch your lives in those vulnerable moments make a difference. But it did grow me, and it gave me the freedom to set boundaries for myself and say no about some things and say a lot of yeses to others.
I'm kind of curious about the moment that you had to tell your family that you actually were the one that was sick. When you had to say, this is my diagnosis. What did that feel like?
Well, there had been a breakdown, emotional breakdown I had had. My family would always tell me, you just have to tell us, and we'll do whatever. So there was a day where I just didn't have the energy to fix dinner. And so my go-to has always been, since I was young, to go for a drive in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And this was probably late May of 2021. And God spoke to me on that drive. I was sobbing and I was so angry at everybody, at home. I'm like, they're all grown and everybody's moaning and groaning, about, me not doing this, me not doing that. And I heard God very loudly say, Jenifer, you are sick and you are going to need to let others, it was bold text. It just came through very loud. So when I came home that night, my husband is very good. He brought everybody together and said, we got to talk this out as a family. And we all did. And these are, my kids are grown at this point. I've got two in college. One was just finished her master's. The other was in a senior year. My other was just in her senior year of high school. So these are grown people we're having these conversations with. So at that point, I had tried to tell them that I knew I was very sick. And my husband was like, no, you'll go to the doctor and everything will be fine. So when the time did come on July 29th, 2021, I did not have an emotional reaction when the doctor woke me up and told me. And I do think that, along with where my brother was when we got home, my husband and I remember we were sitting in the car and we said, okay, we're going to go in and tell the kids. And the doctor did tell me, he said, this isn't a death sentence. People can live through this. And he knew what I was going through. He was friends with my brother. So he knew the story of where we were in our life. So when we got out to the porch, and we told the kids, I think my husband spoke, honestly. I don't think I spoke. I think he said the words, and then followed up with, that, it will all be good. And then the next thing I did was I called my prayer warrior friends and I called my minister and I called my parents. And that was the hardest, I really think, was telling my parents. And everybody came to the house and we did a prayer circle. And that's where my strength continues to come from.
Did you tell your brother?
My brother, yes, I told my brother, but he
knew.
He knew.
He knew.
He knew.
Wow.
He knew.
And I would like to I've got to ask my dad, because I remember I ended up being able to be seen much sooner. And anybody that's listening to this, whether, caregiver or the one being cared for, the roller coaster journey you're on, the highs and the lows and when you're told no. And that's one thing I do want to say, no matter what your role is, you got to be an advocate for yourself. You've got, your caregivers, we're so often advocating for everybody else all the time, that we allow ourselves to be put in the back. And this really had me be the advocate, for myself. And I was told that I could not be seen or there was no availability for me to be seen. And I just called up the scheduler sobbing. And I said, I will be dead. I will be dead if I cannot. And I truly, I was no longer eating. I mean, there was no way I was going to be able to go 3 weeks without being seen. There wasn't. And sure enough, there was an opening and she saw me. And when she saw me at UVA, she said, go downstairs, get the blood work. I want you back tomorrow and we're going to operate. And that's when they did the first ostomy.
Wow.
That saved my life. So then I didn't see my brother until after all that unfolded. And so my dad has a picture of me and my brother, it's got to be the most pitiful picture ever, because he was in the last 2 weeks of his life and I was fighting for mine.
It's weird. I know we just let this keep going. We just rolling because I'm like, we're way over our time and I don't even remotely care. No, I don't care. And so, because this is so important, because this also comes back to, I think about the impact that chronic stress and caring for yourself can have on your body, and that many caregivers can get sick. And I'm not saying that your cancer is a direct result. However, that we know that chronic stress and, certain hormones and chemicals in our body that free flow because of this can impact your immune system and ability to fight off. It's just the facts are out there. You're unsure, you can email me and I'll send it to you because I can tell you that it's true. And it's no difference in people who have experienced trauma as children, and how this can impact your life. And so, the thing is that, would you say, let me ask you this question because we do need to do sister questions. Would you say that you were mindful about keeping all of your appointments and taking care of yourself during the time that you were providing care up until, like, I see this head nodding no for those who can't or aren't watching on YouTube?
No.
And so
I constantly put my own, my tank was getting filled, and I'll take ownership for it. My tank was getting filled, filling others and caring for others. And many a missed doctor's appointment, I thought all my symptoms were related to menopause. I mean,
menopause is hateful,
right? I mean, well, I didn't end up going.
We could go into another podcast on menopause alone.
Well, I ended up getting my complete hysterectomy at the time with the others, so I, didn't have all those slow side effects. What I was experiencing was all colorectal cancer related, I believe. Yeah. So no, to answer your question, very, very honestly, I had not been good about any of that.
And we're all guilty of it.
Yeah.
We're all guilty of it.
And even when my children were little, I was so diligent about making sure they got to the doctor. I was so diligent about making sure my mother and my father follow through on their appointments and getting Bob to his and, all of it. And my grandmother had an ostomy, and, this is the other thing, like, why didn't that ever come up? My grandmother had colorectal cancer in her, late 80s, right? Like ding, 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 ding.
I'm not going to lie to you. We've said the same thing. We have we always joke that we have jacked up vaginas and uteruses and all that stuff. And so it's true. But like when, JJ got sick, and then we find out from our aunt that other people in our family have had, issues. We're like, okay, where was everybody talking about this on Sunday? Like, can we not share some family medical history and just pass that around like we're passing the tray or plate at church? So like I think this is the other thing. And it's one of those, like, we have to be as families more diligent about sharing kind of longitudinal medical history, like generational medical history. Because I think that's important to say, if we have a history of it, and some things, like, I know your dad has Parkinson's, but, and that is not necessarily, it's not proven to be genetic that I'm aware of, but we also don't know as much as we need to know. And so the more that we know about our past medical history, including both sides of the family and people who have had things, the more that it allows you to be more aware and have an awareness for signs and symptoms that allow you to do more prevention. And everybody's guilty of it, girl.
Yeah. Well, and I knew my grandmother had an ostomy. I mean, I was part of, I knew that had happened. But, once again, I was in my 20s, and I also wasn't putting myself first. So I didn't advocate for myself. And it took this diagnosis for me to advocate for myself and continue to.
Jay, we're going to jump into sister questions. I feel like for all of our friends in UK Health Radio.
I've been writing mine down, so I have to pick one.
Okay, yeah.
And we laughed, Jenifer, because
you're over there shopping on Amazon or what? She looks down. I'm like, what?
My menopause means I can't remember anything, so I have to write everything down. I'm like, okay, this was a question. And then because I'd get to sister question, be like, what was my question? So my question is, I know that everyone has to have a rock or a source of, I guess, energy and something that really brings them back to center. And I continue to hear, and even read in your bio, that your source is your faith, which is, for me, incredibly important. Can you just share a little bit about that? And just tell me something that you would want to share about why that is so important. You would share with our audience.
For me, having God and Jesus as my higher power freed me from my need to control. It allowed me to focus on gratitude, which I do believe was a huge part of my healing. I spent intentionally, even on the most difficult of days, I would say 3 gratitudes. I remember especially, being grateful for the person who thought of an ostomy, for the first person that allowed somebody to do an ostomy, for chemo, for every human I encountered on my way to the appointments. So gratitude in combination with, expressing that specifically to my higher power was really carries me through each day. And I am very intentional now. And tonight is our night. Every Tuesday night, we do yoga, and we do it together as a family. We Zoom in. I have a dear friend of mine who I met through the Parkinson's support group in Lynchburg, and she comes to our house. And any kids that are available at my son-in-laws or my daughter-in-law, everybody joins in by Zoom, and we do a family yoga, which rejuvenates. It gets me to focus and to remember to breathe. And then I try to incorporate that in my,
I'm showing up at Jenifer's house tonight.
It's a lot of fun.
It's about to be awkward. It's going to be awkward.
It won't be awkward. My oldest is actually, they joke that she's now the older sister that my oldest had always wanted.
I love that idea.
Yeah. That is probably one of the most unique connecting relationship, self-care, joint, congregate self-care, or not.
We're not going to the movies, our family. We're going to yoga. I love that.
We're doing group yoga. We're doing family yoga. It's family night. We're doing yoga. It's not game night. We're doing yoga. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the most awesome. Jay, do you have one more question that you want to make?
No, I'm good. It answers several of mine.
So I'm going to tell you, I feel like she just told us what her guilty pleasure was, although that's not a guilty pleasure. Yeah. I always end every podcast with, what is your favorite guilty pleasure? What is the one thing that you do just for you? Because this family thing, I'm digging that a whole lot.
Well, I'll tell you a new guilty pleasure.
Ready.
It's a new one to me. And I would have never thought that I love it as much as I do. But the hot polar and cold plunge. Have you heard of that?
Oh, I've done hot yoga, but you're talking about plunges.
Yeah. So you do, there's a local place in Lynchburg that you go in and you do the sauna for 15 minutes, and then you get into 52-degree water for up to 3. And then you go back to the sauna, and then go back, and you go back and forth and back and forth. And they bring you hot tea in between. And let me tell you, the first time I did it, I could only do a minute. But the breathing from yoga helps, because it's through that breathing that you can tolerate. But I've now gotten up to where I can do the 3 minutes in the coldest tub, and then do the 15 minutes in the hot sauna, and then go back and forth. And there's another thing that my children, when they come in town, that we do together. But it does something to my endorphins. So that's my new guilty pleasure.
I'm going to tell you right now, if you think about athletes get into cold baths, and they do something very similar, because what it does is it talks about, I know that this is like regenerating for your body, and that it is actually so good. And Jay, I think we should go to Lynchburg and do this with Jenifer. Yeah. I think that
I'm going to attend the yoga class. I'm not sure about that cold thing.
I think I would totally do the cold bath.
Okay, and the next time I'm in Lynchburg, I'm calling you, Jenifer. I'm willing to do it, Natalie. If we do it, though, we have to video, because I don't know.
We're going to video it.
Oh yeah. It is so rejuvenating. And I'm actually going to be doing it this weekend.
Oh,
yeah. So it's not become committed to a certain amount of time, but it just so happens that I'm at least doing it once a month so far.
Oh, wow. That's like getting a massage once a month. So now I'm taking the plunge once a month. I'm going to have to check and see if they've got something in Roanoke. They got to, because this is really cool. But I'm going to tell you, Jenifer, what a blessing you have been.
Thank you so much.
This morning.
Well, thank
Your
you.
story is just, it's so inspiring. And your words of wisdom. I know we could talk even more. We didn't even get to talk about you're currently caring for your dad and supporting your mom, like in the sense of supporting the family with your dad with Parkinson's. And I saw a lot of stuff. We're going to have Jenifer's information in the show notes. So you definitely want to follow along with some of her journey and learn more about Bright Star. Guys, she is a fantastic resource when it comes to understanding home care. So I'm going to tell you right now, she is an amazing human being. I was privileged to get to sit on a panel right next to her, which is clearly why she's now my bestie and not JJ's. And, but she can be JJ's bestie. But thanks so much, Jenifer, for being with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Jay, do you want to close this out?
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Jenifer. And until we confess again, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.